It's embarrassing to admit that for the last year, the most consistent relationship in my life has been with someone I've never actually met. I don't even know their name. To me, they are just 6B, a designation on a peeling brass mailbox in the lobby, and a series of muffled sounds that drift through the ceiling of my apartment. The walls in this building are thin, porous things. They weren't built for privacy, but for mere separation, holding us all together in a grid of stacked lives. When I first moved in, the lack of true silence bothered me. I wanted to be alone, truly alone after everything that happened before. But now, that leakage of sound is the only thing that makes me feel like I'm still part of the human race. It started about 6 months ago, right when the burnout finally calcified into a paralyzing numbness. I had stopped going out. I had stopped answering texts. I was working remotely, technically, but mostly, I was just staring at the glowing rectangle of my laptop until the sun went down, achieving nothing but the passage of time. I felt ghostly, like I was slowly becoming transparent. That's when I began to latch onto 6B. Their life had a rhythm that mine had entirely lost. Every evening at 6:14 p.m. Emerald 6:10, never 6:20, the front door above me would open and close with a firm, decisive click. Not a slam, just a definitive end to the workday. Then came the sounds of arrival. Keys dropped into a ceramic bowl, the heavy, metronomic thud of work shoes being traded for the softer shuffle of slippers. It was a ritual of decompressing that I found strangely hypnotic. I would sit on my worn-out beige sofa, the one I'd bought secondhand and never bothered to clean properly, and I would just listen. I'd mute the TV. I'd close my eyes. I needed to know that someone, somewhere near me, was functioning, that someone could still go out into the chaotic world, survive it, and come back to a safe harbor. Over weeks, I built a profile of them based solely on these acoustic scraps. They were solitary. I never heard voices raised in conversation, never heard the chaotic overlapping of guests. They liked jazz, not the frantic, discordant kind, but slow, mournful saxophone pieces that sounded like rain against a window pane. Sometimes, late on Tuesdays, I'd smell cooking that was far more ambitious than my own. Rotation of toast and cold cereal, roasted garlic, something with heavy spices that spoke of care and patience. I found myself timing my own meager meals to theirs. When I heard their silverware clink against a plate, I would take my first bite. It felt less pathetic than eating alone in the silence. It was a shared communion, completely one, a phantom limb of companionship that I was terrified to lose. I started to worry about them when they were late. Once, when 6:14 p.m. bled into 7 p.m. with no sound from above, I found myself pacing my small living room, genuinely anxious, checking the window to see if an ambulance had pulled up outside. When the door finally clicked open at 7:35 p.m., the relief I felt was so profound it made my knees weak. That was the moment I realized how precarious my own situation was, that I was using a stranger's routine as the only scaffolding holding up my collapsing life. The realization of my dependency didn't make me stop. If anything, it made me lean in harder. I became a connoisseur of their quietude. I learned to distinguish the heavy, tired footsteps of a Wednesday night from the lighter, more energetic movements of a Saturday morning. I knew when they were reading hours of utter stillness broken only by the faint creak of a floorboard as they shifted weight in what I imagined was a comfortable leather armchair. I knew when they were restless. Those were the nights that mirrored my own insomnia, when I would hear them pacing, a slow, measured back and forth track that ran directly above my bed. It felt like they were pacing for both of us, walking off the anxieties that I was too paralyzed to even confront. In those dark hours, staring at the ceiling, I felt an intense, almost painful kinship with this invisible person. We were two islands in the same archipelago, separated by only a few feet of plaster and wood, yet utterly isolated. I wondered if they ever heard me, if my own life was just as audible, just as open to interpretation. But what would they even hear? The endless clicking of a refreshed browser, the sigh of someone too exhausted to sleep but too awake to dream. My life was a void of meaningful sound. Then, last Thursday, the pattern broke. It wasn't a subtle shift, like a late arrival. It was a violent rupture. At 3:17 a.m., I was jarred awake not by pacing, but by a crash, something heavy and glass shattering against the floor above my kitchen. It was followed by a sound I had never heard from 6B before, a sharp, choked cry, not a scream, but the sound of someone desperately trying to remain silent while in sudden, sharp pain. Silence followed, thick and heavy. I lay frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The silence stretched for 1 minute, then 2. I waited for the familiar sounds of clean up the vacuum, the dustpan, but they didn't come. Instead, there was a low, continuous sound, almost undetectable, unless you were listening with every fiber of your being. It was sobbing, a dry, ragged kind of weeping that sounded less like sadness and more like total defeat. I sat up in bed, my hands trembling. The fragile ecosystem I had built, the one where they were the stable, functioning pillar and I was the silent observer, had collapsed. They weren't just a comforting metronome. They were a person, and they were hurting. The realization was terrifying. It demanded action, demanded that I cross the boundary of passive listening. I spent an agonizing 20 minutes staring at my own door. To go upstairs would be insane. It would be an invasion of privacy, an admission of my creepy vigilance. What would I even say? Hi, I live downstairs and I know you usually go to bed at 10:30. So hearing you cry at 3 a.m. is highly irregular. It was impossible. Yet, leaving them alone in that raw distress felt like a deeper kind of moral failure. I finally understood that my isolation wasn't just hurting me. It had atrophied my ability to simply be a decent neighbor. I didn't go upstairs that night. Cowardice won out, rationalized as respecting their privacy. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the eventual, exhausted silence that settled over 6B the next day. The building felt different, charged with a new, uncomfortable awareness. I couldn't focus on my... Every time I looked at the ceiling, I felt a prickle of guilt. The routine didn't return. Friday evening came, and 6:14 passed without the click of the door. Saturday was complete silence. No jazz, no footsteps, nothing. It was as if they had evaporated, leaving only the echo of that Thursday night crash. My anxiety, usually a low-grade hum, spiked into a frantic buzz. Had they left? Were they hurt and unable to move? My mind conjured terrible scenarios, each more morbid than the last, fueled by too much time alone and too little real information. By Sunday afternoon, the silence was deafening. I needed to check the mail, a mundane task I usually put off for days just to have an excuse to leave my apartment, and perhaps, by sheer chance, encounter them. I walked down the dim hallway, feeling hyper-aware of every creak my own shoes made. The lobby was empty, smelling faintly of old carpet and rain. I unlocked my mailbox, mostly junk, flyers for pizza places I'd never order from. Then, I looked up at Roby. Their box, 6B, was overflowing. A thin sliver of a brightly colored envelope was sticking out, precariously close to falling. It looked like a get-well-soon card, or maybe a birthday card that had arrived too late. I was staring at it, transfixed, when the lobby door opened. A person walked in, someone I had seen in passing maybe twice in a year. They looked exhausted, wearing sweatpants and a wrinkled coat over a t-shirt, carrying a plastic pharmacy bag. They stopped when they saw me, or rather, they saw me staring at their mailbox. It was them. It had to be. The connection was instant and intuitive. They carried the same wary heaviness I had heard in those 3 a.m. footsteps. Full again, they said, their voice raspy, like it hadn't been used in days. They didn't seem angry, just resigned. I jumped, embarrassed, Oh yeah, sorry. I was just. It looked like something was about to fall out. They moved closer, reaching past me to jam the wayward envelope back into the metal slot. Up close, I saw the dark circles under their eyes, the tightness around their mouth. They looked like a mirror image of how I felt on my worst days. Thanks, they muttered, not making eye contact. They turned to the elevator, and I knew this was it. The moment would pass, and we would return to being strangers separated by a floorboard. The words stuck in my throat. I didn't know what I was doing. I took a breath, a real risk for the first time in months. I heard something break the other night. Upstairs, I wanted to make sure you were okay. They stopped. The elevator button, already pressed, glowed a dull red. They didn't turn around immediately. For an agonizing second, I thought I had overstepped, that I had broken the unwritten city code of mutually assured ignorance. When they finally turned, their expression was unreadable, a mix of surprise and something softer. Maybe relief. You heard that, they said. It wasn't a question. The walls are pretty thin. I offered a weak apology for my vigilance. They let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. Yeah, they are. They looked down at the pharmacy bag in their hand, then back at me, really seeing me for the first time. I dropped a vase. It belonged to my mother. I was trying to move it in the dark, like an idiot. Cut my foot pretty bad. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it, not just polite filler. I felt the weight of that small tragedy, the loss of something sentimental, the physical pain, the loneliness of dealing with it at 3 a.m. It's fine. It's just a thing, right? But their eyes betrayed them. It wasn't just a thing. They shifted their weight, wincing slightly. I realized I didn't even have any bandages. Had to use a dish towel until this morning. We stood there in the awkward, quiet lobby, to people who knew each other's most intimate rhythms, but had never exchanged a word. The silence now wasn't heavy. It felt tentative, like a bridge being tested. I'm in 5B, I said, uselessly, as if they didn't already know where the creeper who listened to them lived. I know, they said, and a faint, genuine smile touched their tired face. You listen to a lot of podcasts on weekends, usually about cults, right? I felt myself blush, a hot wave of mortification. Oh God, is it that loud? Only when I'm lying on the floor, they said. And this time it was definitely a laugh. It's okay. It's nice, actually, to know someone else is there. That admission hung in the air between us, fragile and profound. It was permission. It was an acknowledgement that the tether went both ways. We weren't just two ships passing in the night. We were two ships anchored in the same harbor, weathering the same storm. Well, I said, feeling lighter than I had in a year. If you ever need a bandage at 3 a.m., I usually have some. Thanks, they said. Stepping into the arriving elevator, they held the door for a beat. I'm Alex, by the way. Jordan, I said. The doors closed, and I was alone in the lobby again. But as I walked back to my apartment, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full of possibility. I hadn't magically fixed my life. I was still burnt out, still struggling. But when I heard the familiar click of their door upstairs a few minutes later, it didn't just sound like a routine. It sounded like a greeting.